Afghanistan, a landlocked nation in Central Asia, has a military history as rugged and unforgiving as its mountainous terrain. For centuries, this region has been at the crossroads of empires, a battleground for powerful dynasties and a crucible for fierce warriors. From the rise of the Hotaki dynasty in 1709, Afghanistan's military has been constantly tested, transformed, and ultimately defined by the echoes of conflict. This is the story of a nation forged in fire, where empires have risen and fallen, where foreign powers have intervened and retreated, and where the Afghan people have fought tirelessly for their right to self-determination. This essay will explore the key periods in Afghanistan's military history, from the empires of the 18th century to the Taliban's resurgence in 2021. We will examine the major wars, the influence of foreign powers, and the key changes in its military structure, aiming to understand the forces that have shaped this nation's tumultuous journey. The origins of the Afghan military. The military history of Afghanistan, Pashtun Afghanistan MSLH Huk, began before 1709 when the Hotaki dynasty was established in Kandahar, followed by the Durrani Empire. Afghans have served in the militaries of the Ghaznavids from 963 to 1187, the Ghurids from 1148 to 1215, the Delhi Sultanate from 1206 to 1527, the Mughals 1526 to 1858, and the Persian army. The current Afghan military traces its origin to the early 18th century, when the Hotaki dynasty rose to power in Kandahar and defeated the Persian Safavid Empire at the Battle of Gulnabad in 1722. Here's an account of British trade across the Caspian Sea by Jonas Hanway. The sun had just appeared on the horizon when the armies began to observe each other with that curiosity so natural on these dreadful occasions. The Persian army, just come out of the capital, being composed of whatever was most brilliant at court, seemed as if it had been formed rather to make a show than to fight. The riches and variety of their arms and vestments, the beauty of their horses, the gold and precious stones with which some of their harnesses were covered, and the richness of their tents contributed to render the Persian camp very pompous and magnificent. On the other side there was a much smaller body of soldiers, disfigured with fatigue and the scorching heat of the sun. Their clothes were so ragged and torn in so long a march that they were scarce sufficient to cover them from the weather, and their horses being adorned with only leather and brass, there was nothing glittering about them but their spears and sabres. Jonas Hanway, 1712-1786. When Ahmad Shah Durrani formed the Durrani Empire in 1747, his Afghan army fought a number of wars in the Punjab region of Hindustan during the 18th to the 19th century. One of the famous battles was the 1761 Battle of Panipat, in which the Afghans invaded and won a victory against the Maratha Empire. The Afghans then engaged multiple wars with the Sikh Empire. The Afghan-Sikh Wars saw major territorial losses for the Afghans. During the First Anglo-Afghan War, British India invaded Afghanistan in 1838, but withdrew in 1842. During the 3 years, a number of battles took place in different parts of Afghanistan.
Here's King Habibullah Khan with the military men of Afghanistan in the early 1990s.
Traditionally, Afghan governments relied on three military institutions: the regular army, tribal levies, and community militias. The regular army was sustained by the state and commanded by government leaders. The tribal or regional levies, irregular forces, had part-time soldiers provided by tribal or regional chieftains. The chiefs received tax breaks, land ownership, cash payments, or other privileges in return. The community militia included all available able-bodied members of the community, mobilized to fight, probably only in exceptional circumstances, for common causes under community leaders. Combining these three institutions created a formidable force whose components supplemented each other's strengths and minimized their weaknesses. The 19th century brought new challenges to Afghanistan. The expanding British Empire, vying for control of Central Asia, clashed with the Afghans in a series of conflicts known as the Anglo-Afghan Wars. These wars, fought with great ferocity on both sides, ultimately resulted in Afghanistan becoming a buffer state between British India and Russian Turkestan. At the outbreak of the Second Anglo-Afghan War, 1878 to 1880, the regular army was about 50,000 strong and consisted of 62 infantry and 16 cavalry regiments, with 324 guns mostly organised in horse and mountain artillery batteries. Jalali writes that although Amir Sher Ali Khan, 1863-78, is widely credited for founding the modern Afghan army, it was only under Abdur Rahman that it became a viable and effective institution. The Library of Congress Country Study for Afghanistan states that Abdur Rahman was the creator of the modern Afghan state. When he came to the throne in 1880, the army was virtually non-existent. With the assistance of a liberal financial loan from the British, plus their aid in the form of weapons, ammunition and other military supplies, he began a 20-year task of creating a respectable regular force by instituting measures that formed the long-term basis of the military system. These included increasing the equalization of military obligation by setting up a system known as the Hasht Nafari, whereby one man in every 8 between the ages of 20 and 40 took his turn at military service. Constructing an arsenal in Kabul to reduce dependence on foreign sources for small arms and other ordnance, introducing supervised training courses, organizing troops into divisions, brigades and regiments, including battalions of artillery, developing pay schedules, and introducing an elementary and harsh disciplinary system. Section 4. The Soviet era and Mujahideen resistance from 1979 to 1989. After the Third Anglo-Afghan War ended, the reforming Amanullah Khan did not see the need for a large army, instead deciding to rely on Afghanistan's historical martial qualities. This resulted in neglect, cutbacks, recruitment problems, and finally, an army unable to quell the 1929 uprising that cost him his throne. However, under his reign, the Afghan Air Force was formed in 1924. The Afghan armed forces were expanded during King Zahir Shah's reign, reaching a strength of 70,000 in 1933. Adamek writes that the army was 60,000 strong in 1936 and included 2 corps in Kabul, 3 divisions in the southern province, 1 division household troops, Guard Division, 1 artillery division, and 2 independent mixed divisions. Total divisions were 13, plus the artillery division .19. It's not clear how much the army was involved in the Afghan tribal revolts of 1944-1947. Following the Second World War, Afghanistan briefly received continued military support from the British government under the Lancaster Plan from 1945 to 1947, until the partition of India transformed British priorities. Afghanistan declined to join the 1955 United States-sponsored Baghdad Pact. This rebuff did not stop the United States from continuing its low-level aid program, but it was reluctant to provide Afghanistan with military assistance, so Daoud turned to the Soviet Union and its allies, and in 1955 he received approximately $25 million of military aid. During the 1950s and 1960s, Afghanistan purchased moderate quantities of Soviet weapons. It was mainly Sukhoi Su-7, Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-21 fighter jets, T-34 and Iosif Stalin tanks, Su-76 self-propelled guns, Gaz-69 4x4 light trucks of Jeep class in many versions, Zil-157 military trucks, Katyusha multiple rocket launchers, and BTR-40 and BTR-152 armoured personnel carriers. Also included were PPSH-41 and RPK machine guns. In addition, the Soviet Union and its allies began construction of military airfields in Bagram, Mazar-e-Sharif and Shindan. By the 1960s, Soviet assistance started to improve the structure, armament, training and command and control arrangements for the military. The Afghan armed forces reached a strength of 90,000 soldiers and 8,000 airmen by this period.
Here's a picture of the Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-15 fighters and the Ilyushin IL-28 bombers of the Royal Afghan Air Force in 1959.
During this time in September 1960, irregulars and regulars of the Royal Afghan Army invaded the Bajar district of Pakistan, which resulted in intense skirmishes with Pakistani forces and local Pakistani tribesmen. However, the Afghan forces faced a defeat after they were flushed out of the area. After the exile of King Zahir Shah in 1973, President Daud Khan forged stronger ties with the Soviets by signing two highly controversial military aid packages for his nation in 1973 and 1975. Between 1973 and 1978, Afghanistan obtained more sophisticated Soviet weapons such as Mi-4 and Mi-8 helicopters, Sukhoi Su-22 and Il-28 jets, a great many T-55, T-62 and PT-76 tanks arrived, and huge amounts of AKM assault rifles were ordered. Armoured vehicles delivered in the 1970s also included ZIL-135S, BMP-1S, BRDM-1S, BTR-60S, UAZ-469 and Ghazi-66, as well as large quantities of small arms and artillery. The Afghan armed forces and police continued to receive up-to-date Soviet weapons, as well as training by the KGB and Soviet armed forces for another 3 years. Due to problems with local political parties in his country, President Daud Khan decided to distance himself from the Soviets in 1976. He made Afghanistan's ties closer to the Greater Middle East and the United States instead. By the time Daoud visited the Soviet Union again in April 1977, the Soviets were aware of his purge of the left that began in 1975, his removal of Soviet advisors from some Afghan military units, and his diversification of Afghan military training, especially to nations like India and Egypt, where they could be trained with Soviet weapons but not by Soviets. In April 1978, there was a coup known as the Sora Revolution, orchestrated by members of the government loyal to the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, PDPA. This led to a full-scale Soviet invasion in December 1979, led by the 40th Army and the Airborne Forces. In 1981, the total strength of the Afghan armed forces was around 85,000 troops, according to the New York Times. The Afghan army had around 40,000 soldiers, mostly conscripts. The Air Force had around 7,000 personnel, and the total of all military personnel was around 87,000 in 1984. Throughout the 1980s, the Afghan armed forces was heavily involved in fighting against the multinational Mujahideen rebel groups who were largely backed by the United States and trained by the Pakistan Armed Forces. The rebel groups were fighting to force the Soviet Union to withdraw from Afghanistan, as well as to remove the Soviet-backed government of President Mohammad Najibullah. Due to large number of defectors, the Afghan armed forces in 1985 were reduced to no more than about 47,000, the actual figure probably being lower. The Air Force had over 150 combat aircraft, with about 7,000 officers who were supported by up to 5,000 Cuban Revolutionary Air and Air Defense Force and Czechoslovak Air Force advisors. Under the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, 1978-1992, weapon deliveries by the Soviets were increased and included Mi-24 helicopters, MiG-23 fighter aircraft, ZSU-23-4 Shilka and ZSU-57-2 anti-aircraft self-propelled mounts, Montana, LB armoured personnel carriers, BM-27 Uragan and BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket systems and Frog-7 and Scud launchers. Some of the weapons that were not damaged during the decades of wars are still being used today. Weapons supplies were made available to the Mujahideen rebel groups through numerous countries. The United States purchased all of Israel's captured Soviet weapons clandestinely, and then funneled the weapons to the Mujahideen rebels, while Egypt upgraded their own army's weapons and sent the older weapons to the Mujahideen. Turkey sold its World War II stockpiles to the warlords, and the British and Swiss provided blowpipe missiles and Oerlikon anti-aircraft guns respectively, after they were found to be poor models for their own forces. China provided the most relevant weapons, likely due to their own experience with guerrilla warfare, and kept meticulous record of all the shipments. Section 5. The Rise and Fall of the Taliban, from the 1990s to 2001. Following the Soviet withdrawal in 1989, the Mujahideen rebel attacks continued and grew in intensity. For several years, the Afghan armed forces had actually increased their effectiveness past levels ever achieved during the Soviet military presence. The 11-year siege of Khost ended with the city's fall in March 1991. But the government was dealt a major blow when Abdul Rashid Dostum, a leading general, switched allegiances to the Mujahideen forces in 1992, and together they captured the city of Kabul. By 1992, the army fragmented into regional militias under local warlords because of the fall of the Soviet Union, which stopped supplying the Afghan armed forces, and later in 1992, when the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan government lost power. The fall of the Moscow-backed regime in 1992 disintegrated the state as well as the army. Bits and pieces of the fragmented military either disappeared or joined the warring factions that were locked in a drawn-out power struggle. The warring factions were composed of odd assortments of armed groups with varying levels of loyalties, political commitment, professional skills, and organizational integrity. Ahmed Ali Jalali, 2002, after the fall of Najibullah's regime in 1992, the various Afghan political parties began to assemble their own more formal armed forces. By February 1992, Massoud's Jamiat-e-Islami had a central force reported at 6 battalions strong, plus additional second-tier units, the bulk of the army made up of regional battalions subordinate to local commanders of the Supervisory Council. On the 16th of January 1993, Jane's Defence Weekly reported that a special assembly of 1335 delegates elected from across Afghanistan had both elected Professor Burhanuddin Rabbani as President of the Islamic State of Afghanistan for 2 years.
You can really see here the barn flag of Afghanistan starting to take shape.
And agreed to establish a regular army with soldiers mostly drawn from Mujahideen groups. Pakistan had offered training assistance. However, a civil war started between the various warlords, including Ahmad Shah Massoud, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Abdul Rashid Dostum, Abdul Ali Mazari, Jalaluddin Haqqani, Ismail Khan, Ata Muhammad Nur, Abdul Rasul Sayyaf, Muhammad Nabi Muhammadi, Muhammad Yunus Khalis, Gul Agha Sherzai, and many others. They received logistic support from foreign powers including Russia, Pakistan, India, Iran, China, France, and others. First, Taliban government period. When the Taliban took power in 1996, the local warlords and their followers fled Kabul to the north of the country. With the backing and support of Pakistan, the Taliban solidified their own state military forces. Al-Qaeda was also training its fighters in the Taliban-controlled territory, including their high-quality 055 brigade. The Taliban forces possessed over 400 T-54-55 and T-62 tanks and more than 200 armoured personnel carriers. The Afghan Air Force under the Taliban maintained 5 supersonic MiG-21 MFs and 10 Sukhoi-22 fighter bombers. In 1995, during the 1995 Airstand incident, a Taliban fighter plane captured a Russian transport. They also held 6 Mi-8 helicopters, 5 Mi-35S, 5 L-39Cs, 6 Antonov An-12, 25 and 26, a dozen and 24-32, an IL-18 and a Yakovlev.
We also look at A-29 Super Torpedoes of the Afghan Air Force, a UH-60A Black Hawk, and an M117 Armored Security Vehicle, or ASV for short.
After the formation of the Karzai administration in late 2001, the Afghan armed forces was gradually re-established by the United States and its allies. US war in Afghanistan, 2002-2021. Over 2 decades, 2001-2021, the United States spent an estimated $83 billion on the Afghan military through the Afghanistan Security Forces Fund and an additional $36 billion to support the Afghan government. Initially, a new land force, the Afghan National Army, ANA, was created, along with an air arm, the Afghan National Army Air Corps, as part of the army. The army later included commandos and special forces. The ANA Air Corps later split off to become an independent branch, the Afghan Air Force. Training was managed initially by the US Office of Military Cooperation, followed by other US organizations, and then Combined Security Transition Command, Afghanistan, and was finally run by the Resolute Support Mission. The President of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan was the Commander-in-Chief of the Afghan Armed Forces, who were administratively controlled through the Ministry of Defense. Before the fall of Kabul, they had major bases and small outposts all across Afghanistan, including in the provinces of Badakhshan, Balkh, Helmand, Herat, Kabul, Kandahar, Nangarhar and Parwan, as well as in the cities of Kunduz, Ghazni, Gardez, Khost, Faizabad, Farah and Zaranj. The Afghan Air Force was relatively capable before and during the 1980s, but by late 2001, the number of operational aircraft available was minimal. The United States and its allies quickly eliminated the remaining strength and ability of the Taliban to operate aircraft in the opening stages of their intervention. With the occupation of air bases by American forces, it became clear how destitute the Air Force had become since the withdrawal of the Soviet Union. Most aircraft were only remnants rusting away for a decade or more. Many others were relocated to neighboring countries for storage purposes or sold cheaply. The AAF was reduced to a very small force while the country was torn by civil war. It was gradually strengthened by CSTCA's NATO-led multinational combined air power transition force.
Here's a picture of the Afghan National Army, including its members of the Commando Corps standing in the front. And here's a picture of soldiers being trained on how to clear improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, on the roads.
By 2006, more than 60,000 former militiamen from around the country were disarmed. In 2007, it was reported that the DDR programs had dismantled 274 paramilitary organizations, reintegrated over 62,000 militia members into civilian life, and recovered more than 84,000 weapons, including heavy weapons. But the New York Times also reported a rise in hoarded weapons and a growing Taliban threat even in the north of the country. Commandos were established in 2007, later growing from a battalion to a brigade. The aim of disbandment of illegal armed groups program was to ban all illegal armed groups in all provinces of the country. Approximately 2,000 such groups have been identified. Most of them surrendered to the Afghan government or joined the new armed forces. The NATO-trained Afghan National Army grew to a size of 31 kandaks, or battalions, at one point 28 of which were announced as combat-ready. 7 regional corps headquarters were created. The National Military Academy of Afghanistan was built to provide future officers, modelled after the United States Military Academy. The Marshal Fahim National Defense University is located in Kabul province and consists of a headquarters building, classrooms, dining facility, library and medical clinic. In addition to this, an $80 million Central Command Center was built next to the Hamid Karzai International Airport. In 2012, Afghanistan became a major non-NATO ally of the United States. Sizable numbers of Afghan officers are sent to be trained in India, either at the Indian Military Academy in Dehradun, the National Defense Academy near Pune, or the Officers Training Academy in Chennai. The Indian Military Academy, which has been in existence since 1932, provides a 4-year degree to Army officers, while the National Defense Academy is a tri-service college, provides a 3-year degree after which officers undergo a 1-year specialization in their respective service colleges. The Officers Training Academy, on the other hand, provides a 49-week course to graduate officer candidates. In 2014, the number of Afghan officers in training in India was nearly 1,100. The total manpower of the Afghan armed forces was approximately 186,000 as of 2021. It was around 164,000 in May 2011. The United States was also largely responsible for the growth of the Afghan Air Force as part of the Combined Air Power Transition Force from 4 aircraft at the end of 2001 to about 100 as of 2011. Types include Lockheed C-130 Hercules and Pilatus PC-12 transport aircraft, as well as Mi-17 troop-carrying helicopters and Mi-35 attack helicopters. The aircrew are being trained by an American team. Eventually, the Air Force had over 200 refurbished aircraft, which includes A-29 Super Tucano attack aircraft, Lockheed C-130 Hercules, and Pilatus PC-12S military transport aircraft, as well as UH-60A Black Hawk, Mi-17 and other types of helicopters. It also included trainers such as Aero L-39 Albatross and Cessna 182S. The manpower of the Afghan Air Force was around 7,000, which includes over 450 pilots. It also had a small number of female pilots. Taliban government since mid-2021. As of the 15th of August 2021, what remained of the Ghani government's armed forces were left leaderless and dispersed due to the 2021 Taliban offensive and the fall of Kabul to the Taliban. Some have since partly regrouped as the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan. As Afghan forces accepted the circumstances of the Doha Agreement and the withdrawal of United States troops from Afghanistan, they understood that American close air support and other strategic assets would no longer be available to support them in combat situations against the Taliban, and they became more willing to surrender to the attacking Taliban forces. Other Afghans allied with the Afghan government looked for ways to maneuver themselves into better positions, having accepted the impending collapse of the government. The Taliban extended their control over the provinces through a series of negotiated surrenders. After Kunduz province was captured, a days-long negotiation between the tribes and the Taliban resulted in a surrender of the government-controlled base to the Taliban. Similar negotiations in Herat saw a wave of resignations in the provincial government, and then the same in Helmand and Ghazni. Outgunned, Afghan special forces based in Kandahar fled. Police officers in Kandahar complained that they had not been paid for 6 months. In early September 2021, the Taliban announced a new interim government. Among the appointees was Maulvi Mullah Yaqub, defense minister, son of ex-Taliban leader Mullah Omar, Mullah Mohammad Fazil Mazloum Akhund, deputy to the defense minister, and Qarif Farsehuddin, a Tajik, listed as army chief. As of October 2021, the Islamic Emirate Army is subdivided into 8 corps, mostly superseding the previous corps of the Afghan National Army. In November 2021, Mullah Yaqub, acting Minister of Defense, announced the new names and of the corps, listed below. Army Corps. The 313 Central Corps, or Kabul Corps, is one of the 8 corps of the Islamic Emirate Army established in October 2021 and headquartered in Kabul. The current Chief of Staff is Maulvi Naqibullah Sahib. The 201 Khalid ibn Walid Corps is one of the 8 corps of the Islamic Emirate Army established in October 2021 and headquartered in Laghman. The current Chief of Staff is Abdul Rahman Mansouri. The conventional corps of the Islamic Emirate Army were renamed in November 2021 by Muhammad Yaqub Mujahid, acting Minister of Defense. The 201 Corps was renamed Khalid ibn Walid, and at the time was under the command of Abu Dujana, Commander, Abdul Rahman Mansouri, Chief of Staff, and Ibrahim, Deputy Commander. The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan era corps it replaced was known as the 201st Selab Corps and was a part of Afghan National Army. The 203 Mansouri Corps is one of the 8 corps of the Islamic Emirate Army established in October 2021 and headquartered in Gardez. The current Chief of Staff is Maulvi Hezbollah Afghan. In December 2021, 450 soldiers, after completing military training, graduated from the 203 Mansouri Corps headquarters in Paktia province. The corps includes of the 2nd and 3rd Border Brigade. Each consists of hundreds of security personnel. The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan era corps it replaced was known as the 203 Tandar Corps. and was a part of Afghan National Army. The 205 Al-Badr Corps is one of the 8 corps of the Islamic Emirate Army established in October 2021 and headquartered in Kandahar. The current Chief of Staff is Mullah Bari Gul Akhund, with General Mehrullah Hamad as the first and current commander of the corps. The corps consists of 4 brigades, a commando battalion and 3 garrison and 1 frontier brigade with integrated artillery and airlift capacity. In mid-November 2021, 300 soldiers, after completing military training, graduated from the 2nd Brigade of the Al-Badr Corps in Zabul province. The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan era corps it replaced was known as the 205th Atul Corps, responsible for the south of the country, Kandahar, Zabul, Uruzgan and Daikundi provinces, and was a part of Afghan National Army. It was captured during the Islamic Emirate Offensive and Battle of Kandahar in August 2021. The 207 Al-Faruq Corps, Pashto 207, Elfard Q Kabriwel RDW, Dari Q Dowel Ardwai 207 LFRDQ, is one of the 8 corps of the Islamic Emirate Army established in October 2021 and headquartered in Herat. The current Chief of Staff is Abdul Razak Akhund. The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan era corps it replaced was known as the 207th Zafar Corps and was a part of Afghan National Army. The 209 Al-Fatah Corps is one of the 8 corps of the Islamic Emirate Army established in October 2021 and headquartered in Mazar-e Sharif. The current Chief of Staff is Abdul Razak Faizullah. The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan era corps it replaced was known as the 209th Shaheen Corps and was a part of Afghan National Army. The 215 Azam Corps is one of the 8 corps of the Islamic Emirate Army established in October 2021 and headquartered in Helmand. The current Chief of Staff is Malvi Abdul Aziz Ansari. The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan era corps it replaced was known as the 215th Maiwand Corps and was a part of Afghan National Army. The 217 Omari Corps is one of the 8 corps of the Islamic Emirate Army established in October 2021 and headquartered in Kunduz. The current Chief of Staff is Mohammed Shafiq. The corps includes Kunduz Brigade, Baglan Brigade, Takhar Brigade and Badakhshan Brigade. The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan era corps it replaced was known as the 217th Pamir Corps and was a part of Afghan National Army. The Badri 313 Battalion, Pashto Bidirai 313 QTH, is a unit of the Taliban. The unit's name is closely associated with the Haqqani network, which has reportedly provided them with training. Elite Taliban units like the Badri 313 have been reported as being critical in the taking over of Afghanistan. In July and August 2021, the Taliban released online video on the Badri 313 Battalion in various local languages, English and Arabic. The Badri 313 Brigade is headquartered at Salahuddin Ayubi Military Operations Academy. That's the end of this video. Like, subscribe, and always keep learning.